Can't believe I'm filming this video, but I'm filming this video. I started my channel almost a year ago. Pretty sure y'all have been demanding the Budgie care guide for about that length of time. You're welcome. I did put a lot of work and a lot of time into this. I'm gonna be splitting it up over the course of 2 or 3 videos. Haven't quite decided yet because honestly, there's just too much information to pack into one video. I did originally film it as one and it was a lot. So I'm breaking this up into chunks and I'm gonna address a couple different things in each video. I also wanna put a quick little disclaimer in. I just wanna say that if you are considering getting a bird, this will be useful to you because I will not be editing out all of the sounds coming from my birds. So if at any point during this video you think, wow, that's a lot of noise and really annoying and I want to turn this video off, keep in mind that this is how it is with birds and this is what it sounds like most of the time. I'm gonna let the birds keep doing their thing. Other than editing out my own little slip-ups words-wise, I will not be editing out any of the bird nonsense, which is something I typically do, and I'm leaving that in intentionally because I really think that most people truly don't understand what they're getting into when they choose to get a bird, and that includes budgies. For example, parrotlets are normally considered a very quiet species, but the one you hear currently screaming is Indy, my parrotlet, who is by far the loudest bird in my house. We'll just wait. And I will be including these things because birds as a whole, as a pet, have about an 80% rehoming rate, and the average bird goes through 4 to 5 homes in a lifetime. And these are animals that bond for life, so you can imagine how traumatic that is. Okay, so where do budgies even come from? Budgies are some of the oldest kept, or the longest kept parrots, and yes, they are parrots. They're originally from the grasslands and deserts of Australia, where they live together in very, very large flocks. In Australia, in the wild, they are yellow and blue colored, but through selective breeding, we have produced different color mutations, so that's where you see the blue and the pieds and all those different colors. I could do a whole separate video on budgie color mutations, but it would take a long, long time, so I'm not. So you've seen budgies referred to as budgies, budgerigars, and parakeets. What's the difference between any of these things? This honestly is such a pet peeve of mine because it's so commonly mixed up, but I am gonna clear it up for you right now because I've seen even vets make this misnomer association. There are tons of different kinds of parakeets, and this includes linoleated parakeets, Indian ringnecks, budgies, lots of different species of parrots. Budgerigars are what we commonly will label in a pet store as parakeets. Why is beyond me. They are budgies. That is what they are. When you see a store that has a box, like one cage labeled budgies and one labeled like fancy budgies or fancy parakeets, they're the same. There's no difference genetically between a budgie and what is being labeled a parakeet. They are all budgies, and honestly, I'm so sick of seeing this mixed up. It drives me insane. Even some of the other people on YouTube do it, and I'm just like, stop. So budgies are often seen as starter birds or beginner birds and are treated quite disposably as a result, which is really unfortunate because a well cared for budgie can live anywhere from 6 to 12 years. I even know some online that have made it to 14. Unfortunately, most budgies will not make it that far. And that usually comes down to poor husbandry, so feeding only seed, accidents. They are really good at getting into all kinds of nooks and crannies. They are also very prone to tumors, which I unfortunately had to go through with Nala in May. It's kind of a result of them being mass produced for the pet industry. They're quite overbred, and it's not at all uncommon for budgies to get tumors. All right, so next let's talk 1 budgie or 2 or 4. Budgies are very much flock animals. They definitely achieve their best mental health when they're around other birds. The reason a lot of people tend to start with 1 or just keep them singly is because they are really intelligent and they do become quite tame, but there's a little bit of a myth going around that if your budgie has a friend, it will only bond to them and won't bond to you, like it's some kind of like instinct, unspoken rule with nature. False, and I'm here to dispel that. So budgies absolutely prefer to be with their own kind. but if you want a pet who is extremely bonded to you, and I will go over the pros and cons of that, but if you want a pet who is extremely bonded to you, starting with a single budgie is often the easiest way to go. So when I first got Nala, I had her as a single budgie because I was home most of the day, and the times that I was working, I was able to keep her on site with me at work and come check on her multiple times throughout the day. So her and I developed a solid bond pretty much right from the get-go because I was around, I was with her, I took my time with the taming and training process and really kind of made the time to bond with her on her own terms. So by the time I got around to getting Chip, which was about 5 months after I got Nala, she was already pretty attached to me. After I got Chip, she definitely preferred being with Chip, but because she was already tame and used to being around me, it made it a lot easier to tame Chip to also want to be around me because he would see Nala interacting with me and having fun, and he would want to get in on the action. Treat, turn around. Oh, good girl. One other one. Turn around. Yes, Chip, you're delightful as well. There you go. Budgies are not domesticated animals like cats and dogs. They don't inherently want to be with us. Their instinct tells them to be afraid of us. So you really need to put the time into making your budgies, to earning the trust of your budgies. It's not something that's easily given. They're kind of like cats. It's less of a training process and more of a bargaining process and kind of teaching them that it's worth their time to spend time with you and form a bond. For bonding with your bird, I always recommend millet and keeping the millet in your hand and not in the cage, because if you leave a spray of millet in the cage, like pet stores will often tell you to do because budgies love it, but if you leave it in there and then try to offer the millet from your hand, they're not going to take it because they have free millet already in their cage. So it's not going to be a very useful reward to them if they don't have to work to get it. So my guys, when I'm training, they only get millet from me. It only comes from me, from my hand, after they've completed whatever task I'm asking to do. I don't want to go too far down the taming spiel, but sometimes when I'm taming birds, the task is as simple as making eye contact with me. When you look at Indy, who had a pretty rough start in life, that's kind of where his comfort level is at, is having a hard time making and holding eye contact with me, or even being close to me or acknowledging me. So every single time he does that, I give him a piece of millet. So pros and cons to having one bird versus two birds. With one bird, you have a feather. Ow, stop, let me get that feather. All right, and in typical bird fashion, Cusco has interrupted this video by deciding that he needs to play right now, so that's what we're gonna go do. So, quick pause for some lovebird shenanigans, and then we'll be back to talk about the pros and cons of having one budgie or two. I'm gonna biff that around while I'm trying to film. Yeah. Yeah, you are. Get it. Oh my gosh. Look at you smirking. Don't you throw that off the bed. Thank you. Bring it over. Rude. He does know how to play fetch. He's just, wow. He's just being obstinate. Do you feel better? Look where it is now. It's all the way over there. Stop throwing it off the bed. So that's done. I can't even remember where we left off on whether you should choose one budgie or two. The short version is that if you get one, you'll have an easier time bonding with them, but they have much higher social needs than if they have two. So if you're not somebody who's home the majority of the day and able to interact with your bird the majority of the day, then it's really in your best interest to get two, or at the very least, get a second one after taming your first. Now, one of the cons of adding a second budgie is you can run into situations like I did with Kita and Chip, where even though I introduced them in a neutral area in the proper manner, they still don't get along super well. Kita is a little bit pushier with Chip, and this causes quite a few scuffles. So I guess what I'm trying to say by that is, if you don't want a second budgie, you need to be putting the time in with your first to make sure that they're not lonely, because otherwise you're essentially getting your pet a pet, and if they end up not getting along, you will need to house them separately and just let them out to socialize together, which is what I do with my guys. Which brings me to my final point in this video, which is regardless of whether you have one budgie or 7, you need to also prepare yourself for the idea that they are going to poop in your house. You do absolutely need to let your budgies out for out of cage time to exercise. Flight is pretty much the only method birds have for exercising themselves, and when they would typically fly hundreds of kilometers in a day potentially, especially budgies, keeping them in a cage can cause not only disaster for their mental health, which again will result in behavioral issues like screaming, it will also put them at risk for becoming obese and allowing their muscles to atrophy, which eventually can be a contributing factor in fatty liver disease. So for my guys, even though they have their indoor aviary where they spend the majority of their days, I still make sure they get at minimum an hour of out of cage time every day to just fly around, explore, and feed birds. And that applies to my budgies. Chip is actually out the majority of the time because he's getting older and mostly just sits around. So he actually sits out most of the time, and I put him inside at night. But the others, I let out minimum 1 hour a day for them to socialize and be active, and then afterwards I go around and clean up all the little turds. Budgies poop on average every 5 to 15 minutes. They have very quick metabolisms. They're gonna poop on everything, regardless of how long you let them out of their cage. You will be cleaning up budgie poop for the next 6 to 12 years. You'll get desensitized to it very quickly, I promise, but it is one of the realities of owning birds. All in all, I usually recommend keeping minimum 2 budgies, or starting with 1 and then adding another once the first one is tame. So that's gonna wrap it up for this one. I'm sorry if it was a little bit scattered. The birds are everywhere right now. You can hear Kita calling to Chip, and of course Cusco is milling around doing his thing. In the next budgie care guide video, I will be covering housing, taming, and a little bit of food as well. So be sure to stick around for that. As always, if you have questions or things you want to talk about or tips you want to share, things that you've gone through with your budgies that have worked well, drop them down in the comments below. I respond to everything, or I try to respond to everything. Remember to like, subscribe, all that good stuff that YouTube tells you to do so I can feel validated. And I will see you guys in the next one.